good to see you all. Thanks for joining us and worshiping King Jesus together. If you don't know me, my name's Andrew, one of the pastors here at GFC. Pastor Corey, he's away this week. He's preaching at a sister church of ours, filling in for somebody. So we're really excited for him to be there. But if you haven't been with us, we've been going through the book of Mark this year, kind of in it, and then stepped out of it for a little bit. We've been back in it now for a couple weeks, I'm pretty sure. And this week we're going to be in Mark chapter 8. So if you have a Bible, feel free to turn there, or there are on the cards around the room a QR code. Scan that. You'll find our follow along. If you can't find a card, go to our website. You can find the follow along on there. But like I said, we'll be in Mark chapter 8. And we're going to be moving through this chapter kind of most of it, not quite all of it, but a lot of it. And we're not going to zoom into many parts. It's going to be a quick, fast-paced, hopefully, as we move through this bunch of stories that Jesus has for us today. They're all kind of interconnected. But before we dive into that, who here has had the experience of you have something you really want to tell somebody? Maybe it's some sort of news, maybe it's an accomplishment, something's happening, and you are so excited to tell someone, and as you start to tell them, you can clearly tell from their face, from their body language, either they don't understand what you're saying or they just don't care what you're saying. And if that person's here, don't look at them, don't point them out. We're not shaming anybody. I've done the same thing. I know I've done that to my wife. I probably do it every day. Just telling me something, and then I'm just in my own little world, because that's what Andrew does. And we're all flawed human beings. We've all done that. We've all had that experience where you're talking to someone, and it's just like, man, it's just in one ear and out the other. And today we're going to see in these stories where Jesus, he's going to be trying to communicate to his disciples. Actually, throughout the whole book of Mark, a big question that's come up so far is, who is this guy Jesus? No one has been able to really articulate who he truly is except for the demons. All right, the demons have given the most clear answer to who he is. And everyone has these guesses, like, who is this guy? And it just seems like sometimes everything Jesus is doing, everything he's saying, it's just going in one ear and out the other. Whether it's because some people choose to block their ears, like blind their eyes to what Jesus is doing, or because they just don't get it. And so Jesus, we're going to see him kind of weeding through this and trying to call his disciples to really understand. So like I said, we're in the book of Mark chapter 8. So here we go. Mark 8, verses 1 to 5. This is where it starts. It says, "About this time, another large crowd had gathered, and the people ran out of food again. Jesus called his disciples and told them, 'I feel sorry for these people. They have been here with me for 3 days, and they have nothing left to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will faint along the way, for some of them have come a long distance.' And his disciples replied, 'How are we supposed to find enough food to feed them out here in the wilderness?' And Jesus asked, 'How much bread do you have?' 7 loaves, they replied." All right, if you've been with us so far, this story might seem like, wait, time out. Haven't we been here before? Haven't we done this? See, 2 chapters ago in Mark chapter 6, there's another story that sounds just like this. And we get this hint where he says, about this time, another large crowd. And again, they ran out of food. So there's something like this has already happened. In Mark chapter 6, we have, it's the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Yeah, 5 loaves and 2 fish. And that time, how many people does Jesus feed? Does anyone know? I hear like 5,000. All right. Yeah, let's be confident. 5,000. He feeds 5,000 people. And if you know the story, that again, Jesus, he's teaching these people, and he doesn't want them to go away hungry. And the disciples come to him, and he says, "You feed them." And they're like, "How in the world can we feed all these people? We could work, like it would take months of our wages to be able to feed all of these people," because it says it's 5,000 men plus their families. So really, it could be upwards of 10,000 people or more. We don't know how many people are there. But Jesus is like, "All right, give me what you have." And he just starts handing it out. And he just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming and coming until everybody gets a fill. And then they have 12 baskets left over. So this just happened in Mark chapter 6. It's 2 chapters ago. And now we have this pretty similar scenario. They're out in the wilderness. This time they're there for 3 days. Has anyone ever gone 3 days without food? I haven't. I shouldn't raise my hand. I've never gone 3 days without food. I know I'm hungry after just 3 hours without food. I don't want to imagine or even know what it's like to go 3 days without food. That sounds terrible. But these people are here listening to Jesus, and Jesus has compassion on them, and he doesn't want them to go away hungry. And the disciples are like, where are we supposed to get food in the wilderness? Now, what should we all do at that point? Be like, you're looking at him. He's right there. Don't you remember what just happened? Now, let's go to the next slide. Today, we're going to be using a map to kind of help highlight the story, highlight some of the things that have happened. So let's get oriented to this map. So this is, we're kind of zoomed in on the land of Israel. We have, there's much more to it, but specifically, we have the Sea of Galilee there. It's not really a sea. It's a big lake, all right? And so Jesus spends a lot of time there, but this map, it's kind of giving us some context of the story we're in. So there's kind of this dark blue circle. That's where Jesus fed the 5,000. There's the matching boxes, all right? So then he goes, after that, Jesus crosses the sea, and actually in that story, the disciples go out in front on a boat, and a storm comes, and Jesus, he's walking on the water, all right? So they see him out on the water, and then after that, they're in this little red circle. They're in a place over here. This is actually where Pastor Corey was at last week. He wasn't actually there. In the Bible, he was talking about what happened there. In Mark chapter 7, it would have been sweet if he preached from Israel. That would have been awesome. But in Mark chapter 7, he encounters Pharisees, and he's teaching, and he's kind of butting heads with them again. And then we didn't look at this, but then he and his disciples, they head north to this green circle. And up here, he heals a lady's daughter who has a demon. And then he heals a deaf man. And then after this, we know from the context from the Gospels, they head down to this area. We're not 100% sure where they're at, but they're in this area. Now, in this area, the darker blue, where Jesus feeds 5,000, there's more Jews than Gentiles in that region. But then just south, on the southeastern part, in this lighter blue circle, that tended to be more of a Gentile area, a non-Jewish place. So we have Jesus feed 5,000 Jews, and now he's in this Gentile place. And these people are hungry, and the disciples are like, where are we going to get some food? So let's keep reading. Verse 6, it says, so Jesus told all of the people to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves, thanked God for them, and broke them into pieces. He gave them to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd. A few small fish were found, too. So Jesus also blessed these and told the disciples to distribute them. This is like copy and paste. All right, in the wilderness, bunch of people, they're hungry, and the disciples are like, where are we going to get food? The first time I can understand, because they're thinking, how do we feed these people? Jesus says, feed them, and they're like, Jesus, we got to work for months to feed them. This time, Jesus is like, I want to feed these people, and they're like, I don't know what to do. How quickly they forgot who they were with. Then in verse 8, they ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up the 7 large baskets of leftover food. There were about 4,000 men in the crowd that day, and Jesus sent them home after they had eaten. Immediately after this, he got into a boat with his disciples and crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. All right, so this time just 4,000 men, so not as impressive, all right? No, this is still amazing. Jesus miraculously, once again, provides for all of these people. He has compassion on them, and he gives them bread. So if we can go to the next slide. So here in this circle, we have the feeding of 4,000. And after this, Jesus and his disciples, it said they got on a boat, and they crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. If we can go to the next slide. So when you see a yellow part on the map, that's kind of where I'm highlighting for the rest of the time. So they travel from this area. He just feeds 4,000. They travel across the sea. They get to this red area, which scholars aren't 100% sure how big this region is, but it's somewhere over there. And when they get there, they get off the boat, and then this is what happens in Mark 8, verses 11 to 13. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him, testing him. They demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. Now, let's pause there. When someone has a big claim, it's kind of a next step logic to say, hey, prove it, right? Like when someone has a big statement about who they are or what they can do, the just logical next question is, okay, show me. So when I first read this, it's like, well, this kind of seems like a fair question. They're wanting a sign. They're wanting Jesus to prove himself. I mean, how many of us are just going to just randomly put our faith and trust into something without having some sort of reasoning to do it? But in the original language, this comes across much stronger than what I think the way we read it in English. It says, they demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. They weren't just like, come on, Jesus, do it. No, they were demanding. They were almost forcing him to. They wanted him to do it. They're like, you have to do this for us. And they weren't coming like other people came to Jesus. Because if we step back and just ask ourselves, what does Jesus often do throughout the Gospels? Miraculous things. We could even say that they seem like signs pointing to who he is. He literally just fed 4,000 people with just a few pieces of bread and a couple pieces of fish. That seems like a miraculous sign to me. Like I said earlier, he's walked across the Sea of Galilee. He's fed 5,000 people. He's healed a deaf person. Like all within the last few chapters, we've seen tons of miraculous things. But then this is Jesus' response. He says, when he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit. And again, I don't think the English quite get this as forcefully. This isn't just like, oh man, he's grieved. In fact, he's almost like ticked off. He's just agitated. It's a deep sigh. It's like, why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign. So he got back into the boat and left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. So Jesus, he encounters these Pharisees, and they're not coming in faith to Jesus. They're not coming in curiosity to Jesus. They're coming in their unbelief to Jesus, demanding that he prove himself. They're coming not trying to actually figure things out. They're trying to catch him. They're testing him. They want to catch him in a slip up. And we see this throughout the Gospels where the Pharisees come not seeking real understanding, but seeking to try to get him. We do have a time when a Pharisee named Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and Jesus has a great conversation with him. Jesus wasn't against having conversation. He wasn't against interacting with them. But what he was against was the heart posture of the way these men were coming to him. They weren't coming to him like when we see other miracles in the Gospels where, there's the lady who has a blood flow issue for years and years. And she comes, she doesn't even talk to him. She just touches his robe. And what does he do? He does something miraculous. He heals her. There's tons of times where people come and say, please heal my daughter. Please heal my son. And Jesus doesn't say, I'm not giving you a miraculous sign. No, what does he do? Often he heals them, sometimes from a great distance. So it's not that Jesus is just like, well, I had a long day. I don't want to deal with you. It's not that Jesus is hard-hearted towards them. It's that he knows the way in which they're coming to him. Let's tuck that away. We'll need that later. So let's go to the next slide. So Jesus, he encounters the Pharisees here in this region of Dalmanutha. Now, if you're perceptive, and I think we all are, if you'll see on the left side, there's kind of some colors, blue, red, green, blue, red. There's kind of a pattern starting. We see that? All right, let's go to the next slide. Jesus and his disciples, they leave Dalmanutha, and it says they cross the sea. At this point, we don't know where they're going. This next scene is going to take place in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, all right? It's actually probably in a place similar to where Jesus would have been walking on water just a few chapters ago, in a place where he would have actually had interaction with them very, very recently. And in this scene, this is where some of these colors, the red, the blue, the green, Jesus is going to start to bring these things together, all right? If you're not a map person or a visual person, sorry, this is what we're doing today because I really like it. But Mark chapter 8, this is the way Andrew likes to learn. So Mark 8, 14 to 17. So Jesus' disciples are out in the water, and it says, but the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. All right, time out. We've just had multiple stories in the last few chapters of Someone in this boat, literally not needing anything, but just like, here you go, here's food. And it's just so interesting that Mark, who writes this is the first thing. Like they leave to cross to the other side. And oh, by the way, they forgot to bring any food. But they only had one loaf of bread with them in the boat. So they forgot to bring some, but thank goodness there was a loaf of bread in the boat. I don't know if that's a statement of there actually was a physical loaf of bread, or if that's trying to be like a spiritual hint at, hey, you have the real bread of life, Jesus, because Jesus calls himself the bread of life. I don't know, but the focus is these disciples, they're like, man, we forgot something. They forgot bread. Verse 15, as they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them. He says, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. So Jesus, he's just had this encounter with the Pharisees. He's had previous encounters with the Pharisees. We've just had him multiplying bread, and he kind of brings all these things that are I don't know, they're in his mind. He brings them together. He says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, that's a weird statement. I don't know if you've ever said something like that. I've never said anything like that. But the yeast is a symbol often in Scripture for something that's negative. Sometimes it's used positively, but most of the time it's used in a negative sense. Yeast is something that you put into your flour or dough. I'm not a baker. I don't know the proper terminology. But you put it in there, and what does it do? It makes it rise. Yeah. And without it, it's not going to rise. It's going to be unleavened bread. It's going to be flat. It's not as good. It's more like a cracker. And who wants that? You want bread. And so you put it in there. It helps it rise. And just a little bit. It doesn't take much. You put some in, and it's amazing how just a little bit of yeast can help something go from this to this. Like, it's just so cool. But it's this warning that, hey, these Pharisees have something that even just a little bit sprinkled in could become dangerous. There's an influence they have, something powerful that you need to watch out for. So Jesus isn't talking about literal yeast, right? No, he's talking about something spiritual. He's talking about really what he's talking about, because yeast is often used when it's a negative. It's used for something that's sinful or hypocrisy or oftentimes unbelief. And so he's like, look, guys, beware of these Pharisees. And then he also throws in Herod, who has, we can't look at right now, but we've seen him before come up in Mark, and he doesn't truly think Jesus is who he claims to be. And he's like, look, beware of their sin, their hypocrisy. I think he's really getting at this unbelief, this yeast of the Pharisees that can get in and influence you and others so easily. That's what Jesus says to them. And then verse 16, at this they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. All right, this is one of those times where I don't know if I'm supposed to laugh at the disciples or think they're idiots or just go, aw, like, bless your heart. Like, I don't know what to do. But they clearly do not understand what Jesus is getting at. Jesus is thinking about spiritual things, and they're thinking about physical bread when the one who's provided all the physical bread they could ever want is sitting right there. So they start arguing with themselves. And Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, why are you arguing about having no bread? So Jesus starts asking these questions, and you'll see in this slide, and when we get to the next, not yet, when we get there, over the next couple, when they're in this boat, I put the question marks in orange just to see. He asks so many questions. He says, why are you arguing about bread? Don't you know or understand even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? He's like, guys, you're missing the point. I'm not really talking about physical bread. This whole yeast of the Pharisees, like, stop worrying about bread. Haven't you seen what I've done? Don't you know who I am? Your hearts are too hard. Remember this, picture this, they're on the Sea of Galilee in a boat, and Jesus is talking to them. And like I said, the last time Jesus was probably in this spot on the Sea of Galilee was when he had walked on water and entered the boat. And this is what it says in Mark chapter 6, after Jesus gets in the boat. If we can go to the next slide. In Mark chapter 6, this is after Jesus gets in the boat. It says, the wind stopped. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Jesus has just fed 5,000 this time. He gets in the boat. They don't understand. They're like, wow, this is crazy. He's walking on water. And then what does he say? It says, their hearts were too hard to take it in. It's just so interesting. They're in the same spot. And we get this commentary. After all these people were fed, their hearts are too hard. We fast forward. Similar situation. Jesus has just fed 4,000. They're on the sea in the similar spot. And Jesus is like, guys, you don't get it. Your hearts are too hard. And so he goes on then, back to Mark 8. He says, you have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? All right, that's reminiscent of what has Jesus done up in that green circle? He healed a deaf man. He's like, look, you have ears, can't you hear what I'm saying to you? He's starting to bring up things he's done. Don't you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterward? 12, they said. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? He asked them. How often does God need to tell us something in order for us to really get it? I don't know about you, but there are some lessons that I've had to have in life that have taken God saying things and doing things over and over and over again. And I'm sure there are things right now that he's just like, Andrew, you just don't get it yet, and it's okay. Jesus is still working with these men, but they aren't seeing him clearly the way they should. They're not completely blind like the Pharisees were. I mean, the Pharisees were coming demanding a sign. They didn't really want a sign because Jesus had already given tons of signs. And so it's like they're coming with hard hearts saying, prove who you are. But whatever he would do, they'd just be like, no, prove it again. Because basically that's what Jesus had been doing. All this time, feeding people, healing people. And Pharisees had been there for certain miracles and seen these things. They would have heard the reports. And yet they come, we want a sign. Their hearts are hard. Jesus doesn't treat the disciples like this. Instead of this, it's more like their sight is a little blurry. They're starting to see, but they can't quite see him. And they've spent all this time with him, and Jesus is like, come on, guys, I need you to see who I really am. So they're out in the middle of the lake. And if we can go to the next slide. They're out in the middle of the lake. And like I said, they're here in the middle of the lake. We don't know yet where they're going. But Jesus has this conversation with them where he's basically challenging their inability to see clearly who he is. He's just had this confrontation with the Pharisees where they've come with their unbelief and they're just hard hearts. And he's like, guys, you need to be careful. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees, their unbelief, because it can creep in and it can influence you. You don't see me the way you should. It's still blurry. Be careful of the unbelief that could creep in. And so we find out that Jesus wants to take them to, if you can go to the next slide, he's going to take them to a town called Bethsaida. Bethsaida. It's on the northern part of the lake. Now, Bethsaida didn't have a great reputation with Jesus. We find in other parts of the Gospels where Jesus actually condemns Bethsaida and the surrounding villages for their unbelief. He talks about how it's like woe to you, like shame on you, Bethsaida, because if the things I had done in your town, if I had done, he talks about other like Gentile towns, these people who wouldn't have known God's word the way these people should have. He's like, if I would have done what I did in your town, in their town, they would have followed me long ago. So Jesus, there's this recognition that Bethsaida is a place of just hard-hearted, unbelieving people. And that's where Jesus wants to take his disciples, who he's warning them not to give in to the unbelief, the yeast of the Pharisees. Are we seeing some of the patterns that are coming out in this passage? So if we go to the next slide. It says, when they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. So when I said that Bethsaida, that everyone there was hard-hearted, not everyone was. There were some people who did believe, but by and large, we have other accounts where Jesus is like, these people. But this blind man comes. They begged him to touch the man and heal him. And Jesus, he takes the blind man by the hand and he led him out of the village. Many of Jesus' miracles are public. This one he takes privately away. And then it says, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" Now, I don't know about you. If someone wants to spit on your eyes, don't let them do that, all right? This is kind of gross. So what in the world is Jesus doing there? Scholars are kind of... There's different thoughts there. Some of it is the thought of culturally, there was this understanding or a belief that the spittle of like a powerful like healing person could be beneficial or medicinal. There's also the thought, this man's blind. So Jesus, he's meeting him where he's at. He's giving him touch, which would have been the greatest sense or one of the greater senses he would have had. I don't know exactly. It's strange, all right? Sometimes Jesus does strange things, but Jesus wasn't a 21st century American. He was a first century Jewish man on the other side of the world. And so this is how he decides to heal this man. He lays hands on him. He spits on his eyes. It's like, "Do you see anything now?" The man looked around. He said, "Yeah, I see people, but I don't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." So Jesus, he kind of heals this man. It's like this man was totally blind, all right? And then Jesus does the whole weird spitting on the eyes, and now he can kind of see a little bit, all right? He's been healed some, and we're not sure if this man used to be able to see, but he became blind. That's why he's like, says trees, or maybe he's just like, I think that's what a tree would look like. We don't know. The point is, he hasn't been fully healed, which is strange. Because there aren't other healings like this, where it happens and Jesus heals, but it's not a full healing. Like there are other times where it's like, hey, go back home, and the person they go back home and they find their son, or they find their servant healed, or different things like that. But this is strange where Jesus, he touches this man, and it's not a full healing right away. But then it goes on, it says, then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored. He could see everything clearly. And Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." So this blind man comes to Jesus. Jesus partially heals him, and then he fully heals him. Jesus has just come from these Pharisees who are completely blind, completely hard-hearted, don't want to follow Jesus, don't want anything to do with him. They want to trap him. And he's warning his kind of blurry vision disciples who can't really see clearly spiritually. Be careful that you don't go back to this. Be careful that your eyes don't shut. Be careful that you don't give in to unbelief. Be careful. And then he goes and he heals a blind man like this and then like this. Now let's see the last story from today. If we move forward, one more slide. Jesus, he's in Bethsaida. Sorry, move again. This time, they leave Bethsaida and they head north to Caesarea Philippi, around that area. And on the way, this is the conversation that happens. This is the last little bit of the story. Then we'll dissect it some more before we are done. It says, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other prophets." This is very similar to the response people have given earlier in the book of Mark. Then Jesus asks them the million-dollar question, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter, whether he was speaking just for himself or as the spokesman for all 12, he replies, "You are the Messiah. You are the Messiah." Finally, we've gone through all the way through the book of Mark up until this point, where the only beings who have seen Jesus clearly are the demons. And now we have his disciples who Jesus doesn't want them to become blinded. They have this vision that's kind of blurry. They can't quite see Jesus clearly up until this point where it's like, wow, they finally get it. After the thousands of people Jesus has fed, after the walking across the water, after healing all the people, they finally can see he is the Messiah. Now, what does that mean?
It doesn't mean, oh, this is the guy who's just going to fill my belly. This doesn't mean, oh, this is the guy who's going to satisfy all my hopes and dreams. Oh, this is the guy who's going to give me my best life now. No, this is the Messiah, meaning this is the one my soul desperately, desperately, desperately needs. I need saved from something. He's the chosen one, the anointed one, fulfilling all the Old Testament prophecies. This is the Messiah. The demons knew it. Now finally, his disciples, they get it. They finally see clearly. Their faith has grown to a point where they can actually say, I'm not sure. No, they can say, you are the Messiah. So, if we can go to the next slide. All of that work, good job, guys. All of that work following Andrew's crazy map stuff, all the way to this point where Peter declares Jesus is the Messiah. So what can we take away from this? I think there's so much we can take away from this. But I want to give us just a few things. The first is this. Faith is not immune to influences. My faith and your faith is not immune to the influences of this world. The disciples, they're going along, and Jesus is showing them who he is. He's warning them, be careful. If their faith was immune to the influences of the world, to the influences of the Pharisees, to the yeast of the Pharisees, there'd be no point to warn them about it. But because Jesus saw something in them that, hey, you don't quite see me the way you should. You need to see me more clearly. Be careful so that your sight doesn't become more blind. Now, I'm not saying we can lose our salvation. We can lose, once we place our faith in Jesus, I fully 100% believe that once we enter saving faith, we are saved, we're secured. But I do believe that the enemy would love nothing more, first to keep us from saving faith, but then to keep people who have saving faith just completely just apathetic, completely just living fat and lazy in their spiritual walk. Saying, you know what? I said the prayer, I'm good. No, there is a spiritual battle happening that is trying to blind us to what God is doing in the world around us so that God can't work through us, his church in the world, to bring more people into his kingdom. Like, that's the whole point we're here. For whatever reason, the God of the universe is like, hey, I want to use little people like Andrew and everyone else here to be my body, to be my representatives, and to share me with the world. But the enemy's like, I don't want that. So let's keep them, their sight a little hazy. Let's get them distracted with things around them. Let's keep them focused not on building the kingdom, but building their own kingdom. Let's get them so wound up in fear that they can't really see through their fear. They're just so fixated on how afraid they are about life when the author of life is sitting there with them. Let's get them so scared of where their provision is going to come from, all the while they're saying they trust in the God who is the bread of life. Our faith is not immune to the influences of this world. And the enemy would love nothing more than to make us afraid or lazy or apathetic. And my question is just, what's influencing your faith, either in the negative or the positive? Only you can truly answer that. But our faith isn't just going to stand still. It's going to move either towards more blindness or to more sight. Again, I'm not talking about saving faith. I'm talking about when we become a Jesus follower, he's calling us to more sight. He's not calling us to less sight. And so what's influencing your faith? Next thing, faith is not a blind step in the dark, but it is a walk in a dark world. I've heard people talk about faith as though it's just kind of a blind leap in the dark. Like, oh, you believe in God, you just don't believe in reason. Or it's like faith is somehow anti being smart. Or faith is somehow a stupid decision. You just must choose to not actually think. You're not a rational person because you have faith in God. Well, I don't think the Bible ever teaches that we shouldn't think rationally. It never teaches us that we should just close our eyes and like, all right, God, catch me. Like, I'm just going to let go and let God do everything. Like, no. Jesus, when he's talking to the disciples on the boat, what does he do? he points back to the things he's already done. He's like, didn't you see and hear about like the feeding of the 5,000? What about the feeding of the 4,000? Like he's bringing up reasons for them to believe in who he is. And so our faith is not a blind step in the dark. I believe as you dive into studying reasons for our faith, I think it's really strong. When you start to understand how we got our Bible compared to other ancient religious texts, when you begin to look at the design of the universe and how intricately put together it is, when you begin to think about the fact that human beings generally have this idea of right and wrong, like that doesn't just poof out of nowhere. Like, why is it wrong to kill an innocent baby? Why is it good to help other people? Like, we all kind of have these things in us that doesn't make sense unless there's someone over us who's saying, yeah, that's a good thing and that's a bad thing. There's different reasons why I think our faith makes a lot of sense when we look at the world around us. And we don't have time to dive into all of those things. Those are apologetic reasons. And if you have questions, though, about certain things, I know Pastor Corey loves talking about politics. I do too, but I know he's spent a lot more time than I have diving into those things. I'd encourage you, write him a question, or if you want to talk to me, I'd love to point you to a good resource or something. If you have questions or doubts about, can we trust our faith? Are there really good reasons for Christianity? I think there are. And in fact, I think it's our duty as Jesus followers to explore those things so that our faith can grow. So our faith is not a blind step in the dark. It's not against reason. But it is a walk in a dark world. And what I mean by that is faith isn't just this momentary thing. It's not like I put my faith in Jesus, now I'm done with the faith thing. No, it's I put my faith in Jesus, now I have a whole life of faith that I'm supposed to walk in this dark world. We see last time when Jesus was walking on the water, we don't see this in Mark, but we see it in some of the other accounts. When Jesus is walking on the water, who calls out to Jesus and says, hey, if you're really who you are, call me out to you? Who does that? Do you know? Peter. Yeah, one of the disciples in the boat. So all the disciples are there. They are seeing this. They have sight like, wow, this looks like Jesus on the water. Peter's the only one that's like, hey, call me out. And then whether he was bluffing or not, Jesus calls it. And he's like, oh, shoot. Now I got to do it. And he actually does it. He takes a step out. So faith isn't against reason, but it's still faith. There's still that step. There's still this, I'm stepping into the unknown where I don't really know how this might play out, but there's this person here. This is Jesus who's calling me, and I might not know how this is all going to play out, but I can trust in him because I have faith in him. So there's this tension of our faith isn't blind, but it's not just built on reason. It's not just reasoning. If it was just about knowledge, if it was just about reasoning, then the Pharisees, like they had all the knowledge of God's word. They were so devoted to him, but they weren't willing to take the step of faith in this man, Jesus. So our faith shouldn't be stagnant. It should be moving. It should be stepping out. When was the last time you actually took a step out of your immediate comfort zone, out of your immediate bubble to say, hey, I'm going to trust God? Now, I'm not saying just you do something foolish where you're like, I'm just going to jump off the building. I'm trusting God. Like, no, hopefully you don't, just don't do that. But there are times in life where God does call us to take steps out of our comfort zone. And I think, and I've been guilty of this for a lot of my life, I think one of the things the enemy loves to do, especially as 21st century Americans, is make us really comfortable. We can be so safe here in our little church building. We can be so safe in our Christian things. We can be so safe in a world where, hey, I can just order everything off Amazon. I can get Walmart delivered. I don't even have to go anywhere. And I can just pray to God here. And there's nothing wrong with using those things. There's nothing wrong with that. But we are called to go out into this world. We are called to be light. But light is most impactful when it goes into the darkness. When light stays in the light, it doesn't really help do anything more than what's already happening. So what steps are we taking? We don't need to step out blindly, but we do need to walk into this dark world. Lastly, and this is my favorite, faith does not require mastery, but it does require trust in the master. If Jesus wanted our faith, meaning he wanted us to fully understand every little thing about him, none of us would have hope. In fact, if you keep reading this story where Peter has literally just said, "You're the Messiah," the very next story, do you know what happens? Jesus tells Peter, "Get behind me," and he calls him Satan. Like, he uses that strong of a language because Peter, he's just got it. You're the Messiah. And then Jesus starts telling the disciples, hey, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to go. Basically, he starts telling them, I'm going to go to the cross. I'm going to die. And Peter's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You don't need to do that. And Jesus is like, get behind me. You're not thinking like my heavenly Father. You're thinking like the enemy. And then the next story is this story where Jesus takes Peter and two other disciples up on a mountain, and it's called the Transfiguration, where Jesus reveals who he is more truly to them in his divine state. So Jesus, he's not calling them to complete mastery of every little theological thing about him, to fully understand all of him. That would be impossible for us finite human beings to fully comprehend the infinite, eternal, all-powerful God, Jesus. But all he's asking is, just trust in me. The disciples are on the boat with the one who has just provided all their bread, and they're arguing about bread. They're not trusting him. The disciples are walking around with this man who's healing people. They're seeing, but they're not clearly seeing. And he's like, they don't have to fully get everything, but he does want them to trust him. Similarly for us, we don't have to have all the answers. And honestly, you'll drive yourself crazy trying to get all the answers. Jesus hasn't promised us all the answers of our life. He hasn't promised to answer every little question and doubt. He hasn't promised to fix every little thing. He promises, though, that he'll be with us, that he'll care for us, that when we put our trust in him, that nothing can separate us from his love. And I find this really reassuring because sometimes I've looked at faith, I've spent time examining my faith, feeling an anxiousness of like, man, am I really saved? Like, am I really saved? Is my faith really good enough, Jesus? And I heard a pastor recently, his name's Tim Keller, he's no longer with us, but he talked about faith, and he described it, he said, faith is like a windshield on a car, okay? A windshield on a car, you're supposed to spend more time looking through the windshield, not at the windshield. Because what happens if you spend too much time looking at the windshield? You're going to crash. All right, if you're driving along fixated on, oh man, there's all these bugs, and oh man, there's a crack, and there's imperfection, there's a smudge, and how did this milkshake stain happen, and like all these things, and you're going to crash. Faith is something that we look through. At times we can step back and we can look at it. But just the fact that we're trying to see through it, I think points to the fact that God is starting to work in your heart. Because if those questions weren't happening, then I don't think the Holy Spirit would even be working in your heart. In fact, we see in Mark chapter 9, Jesus comes, or he's going to heal this man, his child. And Jesus is like, do you believe? And the guy says, yes, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Does this man have faith? Yes, he does. Does this man have questions? Yes, he does. Does this man have doubts? Probably. He says, I have unbelief. But the very fact that he's going to Jesus saying, I believe, help my unbelief, that is a step of faith. That's very different than saying, God, I don't believe in you, and I'm stepping away from you. Jesus just wants us to move towards him in trust. And so we don't have to get fixated on and spinning the wheels of, am I saved? Am I not saved? Am I saved? Am I not saved? When we just look at Jesus, when we look through the windshield and say, he's there. I need him. Because the danger is we can then start to think, oh, I'm saved because I have a feeling that I'm saved. Well, we're not saved by our feelings. We're not saved by, I can articulate all the right apologetic reasons behind my faith. No, we're saved by our faith in Jesus. That's it. So we need to sometimes not look at the windshield. We need to look through it and just look at Jesus because he's the answer. So our faith does not require mastery, but it does require trust in the master. So this week, I just want to challenge us, church family. Let's be mindful of our faith in our God. Are we actually walking in faith? Maybe for you, maybe you are struggling with this idea of faith feels like a blind leap in the dark. Maybe you do need to take a pause and just kind of step back and look at the windshield a little bit. But for all of us, we should all get to a point where we say, hey, I know the reasons. Now I just need to look through it and I need to trust. And what might God be calling you to step out into this dark world in faith in? I don't know what that answer might be for you. This year we've been having this 1x4 kind of challenge. If you're not familiar with that, it's praying for one person who doesn't know Jesus and getting in God's word 4 times a week. That's kind of the challenge for our church family this year. Maybe there's that one person you've been praying for that you need to step out and you need to get to know him better. Share Jesus with them. Maybe you need to step out and invite him to church. I don't know what it is for you. But the enemy would love nothing more than to take us and to keep our sight blurry and become more and more blind to our Savior who we profess to follow. And Jesus wants us to be wary of the yeast of the Pharisees, of their unbelief. What's influencing your faith? Let's walk in faith this week, and let's look at our Master and trust him. Let's pray.